When Alpha and Omega sits upon his throne and reigns for the 1,000 years called the millennium, there will be a council of 120, the Senate. And we're going to look at this in this video, this idea of a Senate, like a Congress, an assembly place, in a meeting place of those that have seats and have rulership in his millennial kingdom. And we're going to look at this in light of the Council of 120 with the kings of Persia. So there's 120 satraps, and we can see this through the reign of Cyrus, Darius, Ahasuerus, and Artaxerxes. And these will be those that reign with Christ, that John sees. I saw seats, and those that were given to them, there was given a kingdom, authority. So these are the princes of the provinces, and the pattern that we can see through the Persian kings. As we've been on this series of the Persian kings, now we're going to look at the Senate, the seat and authority of Christ's millennial kingdom in Jerusalem in the order of the house of David. So this is the pattern of the 24 elders that you see circled around the throne is a priestly order. It is the elders, the first ones at the wedding supper, the first guests at the wedding supper, the first ones seated at the table in Christ's coming. So these are a series of videos we've been telling you about the man-child. Okay, there's a distinction. There's a child and then there's a man-child in Revelation chapter 12, okay? There's preparation. Then they're seated in heavenly places. And then they will rule as kings and priests on the earth. So as we've been showing you, the palace of Shushan, they're in the palace of Shushan and Christ's kingdom house in heavenly realms, okay? But it's going to be physically on the earth. We saw the palace of Shushan in the previous video, and we also see that as the king's house in the millennial temple. So it's the same priestly order of elders that has been established since the time of Moses. The 70, okay, are part of this, and the 120 trumpeters. At the time when Solomon dedicated the temple, there was 120 trumpeters. So this is this order, 120 in the upper room, the order of the house of David. So in the millennium, those that rule will worship in the house of David and the kings and priests, okay? And there's a precise number for them and a precise order to this council of 120 in the millennium. If we look at a little bit of history and we go through the time of the Persian reign, okay, when the Persians overthrew the Babylonians, when they did, they set up something that was unique to the ancient world. No one had done this before, and that was set up princes over the provinces, or the Persian word is a satrap, or the way we would look at it is a senator. Okay, so let's consider this. So we have Cyrus being the first to set up a large empire with provinces or states, and then leaders over those states, okay? So then, when Alexander the Great overthrew the Persian Empire, he incorporated many of the things that he learned from the Persians into the Greeks, okay? So then, the Greeks didn't use the same word, but they basically did the same thing. They engaged a large empire, and then divided that empire up by regions, and then had leaders over those regions, which then goes to the Romans. So when the Romans first start, they didn't have a Caesar, they were run by a Senate. And the same concept goes to this day to the United States, where you have a Senate, okay, and you have people representing a state or region, okay? So in Christ's millennial kingdom, okay, the regions, when they're set up, there's not voting, okay? The king determines who those leaders are. So, for example, when we have Daniel as a being trained up, okay, in Nebuchadnezzar, he was being trained up to be a leader for the province of Judea. Okay, now, of course, Nebuchadnezzar was doing that so as to find someone sympathetic to the king that would rule, take the taxes from the people, and serve the king. He would speak, the languages and everything else, okay? So that's what Nebuchadnezzar was doing. He was taking a small number of the king's seed, it says, and he was raising them up to be rulers over the region, sympathetic for the king. So in the millennium, this is the process of serving the king. Esther goes through this preparation process. Daniel goes through this preparation process in order to serve the king. So these servants to the king will exist in the millennium, and they will reign over certain geographical areas. So what we can see is, if we take the United States or any country with a parliament, well, we'll use the United States as you have a senator over a congressman over a state, right? And then you have like the House of Representatives. Then you have, more representatives based on the population or cities, right? Well, that same principle will go into the millennium when Christ said to one, okay, you have been faithful over your one talent, I'll give you 10 cities. Okay, so for an example, the region or a province would represent 10 cities. So that person that was faithful with that pound, okay, is part of the 120. So there's 120 states or provinces or regions, right? And then what we'll see is that there's 120 over each state. The number of cities approximately is 10 cities in each region, okay? So this idea comes to us from the ancients, all right? But remember what Isaiah says in Isaiah 45, verse 1, he calls Cyrus my anointed, okay? So even though Cyrus was a Persian king, he received instructions from the Most High in how to go about establishing his empire, okay? As a type and shadow of what we can see with Christ in the millennium. All right, so that's an idea that might be very strange and foreign to many of us. But as we go through and we look at these Persian kings, we can see all the stories coming to perfect fulfillment. For example, Esther. Okay, that king is a Persian king, and we've seen clearly through the book of Esther the type of Christ. Okay, so in Revelation 1:5, Christ being the first begotten of the dead, he's the prince of the kings of the earth. Okay? So when he's the prince, he's the ruler, and then he's going to have satraps. He's going to have princes of the provinces. He's going to have governors, okay, over these areas, okay? So he's the prince of the kings of the earth, and he has made us kings and priests. So this order we're going to see is kings and priests. In Revelation 20, verse 4, I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, judgment was given. So that's clearly the millennium. In fact, let's look at it. Let's just go to Revelation chapter 20. For many of you, this might be clearly understood, but I still have people saying, oh, there's no millennium. The most basic doctrines, there's so much deception. So I saw thrones, they that sat upon them, judgment was given to them. They lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So they don't die. Okay, they live the whole time. They live the whole 1,000 years, and they reign with Christ. Okay, this is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that is part of the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. They shall be priests unto God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So, how this works is it's a priesthood. Okay, it's not just a kind of civil, governmental type thing. It's a priesthood. So they're ruling and they're worshiping in the order of a priesthood, in the order of Melchizedek. Okay, and this is clearly talking about the 1,000 years, and when the 1,000 years were expired, Satan is loosed out of his prison. Okay, and we know that that's Gog and Magog. And we're going to have a series of videos, guys, on the millennium. We do have a new playlist on the millennium. We'll include this video as part of the playlist on the millennium. It's a fascinating study like this one, where we look at the millennial Senate. Okay, it does exist. It is a precise order, is a precise number, and there's a lot of information in the scriptures about it. But it's a concept completely out of the minds of the Protestant Christians. So, Revelation 5:9, this is the interlinear version. You were purchased by the blood of him, and you made them, or you purchased by your blood, and you made them to God, okay, to the God of us, a kingdom and priests, and they will reign on the earth. Okay, so this is the point that they are part of the wedding supper. Is in Revelation chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. For you, Christ, the Lamb, purchased by your blood, and you made them to the God of us a kingdom. So they have a kingdom. Okay, there's specific kingdoms, specific regions. The whole thing is his kingdom, but it's divided up. Okay, and priests, and they will reign on the earth. Okay, so we have this rulership, we have this reigning. And we've been on this series in Daniel chapter 10, Daniel chapter 11, and Daniel chapter 12. So once again, let's just look at Daniel 11, verse 1, verse 2, and I will show you two. Behold, there will stand up 3 kings of Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they are, and by the strength of his riches he shall stir up against the realm of the Greeks, okay? When he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. Okay, so when Christ reigns, his kingdom is going to be divided up into regions. Okay, so those regions, and the understanding of that, we find from these kings of Persia that it mentions right there. So before we go to the notes, I want to look real quick at Zechariah chapter 12, because this is an order of priesthood. There will be kings and priests, all right? And the order of the priesthood is something called the House of David. If you're familiar with the channel, you watched the House of David series, you know what that is. But if you don't, we're just going to mention it briefly because these governors are part of this order. So Zechariah chapter 12, verse 6, in that day I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in the sheaf. And they shall devour all the people round about, and on the right hand and on the left. And Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. Verse 7, and the Lord shall save the tents of Judah first, and the glory of the house of David, and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. Verse 8, in that day the Lord defends the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He that is feeble among them in that day shall be as David, and the house of David as God, as Elohim, as an angel of Yahweh before them. So these are the governors in the order of the house of David, and we can see that order expressed by the 120. Now here's our notes, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over this idea of this millennial Senate. We do have 2 pages. I encourage you to get the notes. We'll post them and link in the description field where you can download this as part of our series on Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12. Okay, so let's take a look at the millennial Senate, okay, and the 120 satraps, okay, the 120 satraps in the millennial kingdom, or the kingdom princes. As we mentioned before, Christ, the first begotten of the dead in Revelation, the prince of the kings of the earth, he has made us kings and priests. Okay, so I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, judgment was given to them. And you, the Lamb, purchased by your blood, and made them to the God of us a kingdom and priests, and they will reign on the earth. That's the interlinear of Revelation chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. Now, I want to mention to you the shekel of the sanctuary. If you're a little bit new to this channel, we have a lot of videos on this, another playlist, but there's something called the shekel of the sanctuary. And here's a replica of what it looks like. And the shekel of the sanctuary is something you would do in a census, so you would count the people. Okay, so this same principle works when numbering these 120 satraps. Okay, I'm just going to run through the numbers real quick. There's other videos that explain this further, But this is how we know that there is 120. So for example, that coin here, we'll put it here, is a shekel. And then in Christ's parable of the talents, he talked about those with talents. Well, there's 10,380 talents, or excuse me, shekels, coins, okay, in one talent, okay? And then each shekel has two people, okay? So each man will give, as part of the census, he would give a half a shekel, okay? So picture if this is a half a shekel and then another half a shekel, the two would be 1 shekel, but they are 2 people, okay? And 10,380 times 2, because it's 2 people per shekel, times 7 talents is 145,320. So from that number, we get 120, okay? That's part of that number, 1,200, and 144,000. I'm sure that's just coincidence, right? Well, this is derived from this principle of the shekel of the sanctuary in the census. So we know that from Christ's parable that these people are part of this order in the millennium. So there's 120 provinces, 1,200 cities, and the wise virgins and the 144,000 will be in the temple. All right, now let's take a look at the 120 as it relates to the kings of Persia. Actually, before we do, I have a little verse right here. When Christ told the apostles, he says, I will appoint to you a kingdom, and you'll sit on 12 thrones. So this order, okay, is based on those 12 thrones. Okay, so you have the 12 apostles, and then 12 times 10 is 120. 12 times 100 is 1,200. So the whole kingdom is based on this order of appointing the kingdom and the thrones that Christ promised to the apostles. I want to mention that real quick as we look now at the 120. Daniel 6:1, Darius set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. Okay, so there are 120 princes, and over these were 3 presidents that the princes should give account to. So these 3 presidents, Daniel was one of them. So the 120 would give account to a higher order, okay, like this here. And the same 120, or actually in Esther 1, Ahasuerus, he has 127. And the 7, oh, here's that thunder. The 7, okay, are a higher order. Okay, we don't have time to talk about them now, but you can see that Ahasuerus reigned from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, okay, and there were 127 princes over those provinces. Now, we mentioned earlier the wedding supper. So in Esther 1, verse 3, he made a feast. This is the first guest to the wedding supper unto the princes, his servants, his nobles, the princes of the provinces. So the 120 were the first, along with the nobles and the servants, to be part of the wedding supper that you see in Revelation 5, verse 10, that we read before. Now, these people we know to be the Persian word satrap. So in Esther 3, verse 12, the king's lieutenants. And that word in Hebrew, which is actually a Persian word, is ahastarpan. Ahastarpan. And it's a similar word that we get kashathrapevan, okay, which is basically a derivation of simple satrap, okay? So the king has lieutenants, or the governor of a Persian province. So we see those in Esther, and the same word we see in Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. So when he set up princes, okay, this word princes in Daniel 6:1, the princes are satraps, governors of a Persian province. Okay, and it means the guardians of the realm. Okay, so King Cyrus, who is has the title Darius here in Daniel 6:1, gets this order and is the first to set up these princes over the provinces, which we know to be our modern Senate. Okay? Now, as we mentioned before, in Luke 19, verse 13, there are 10 servants that were given 10 pounds. Now, we mentioned before about the shekel in the coin. Okay? So when they have 10 pounds, each pound is each pound is 60 shekels. Okay, so you see these shekels, there's 60 shekels. Remember, there's two people for 1 shekel, and so you multiply that by 2, so 60 times 10 pounds times 60 shekels times 2 is 1,200. So that gives us the number of cities in the province. So we have 120 provinces, and we have 1,200 cities, okay? And the first gained another 10 pounds, so he was given 1 pound, he got another 10 pounds, and he said, well done, good faithful servant, have authority over 10 cities, okay? So now you can see that this is the 10 cities. So we take the 120, multiply it by the 10, and we have the 1,200 cities. And he said, have authority over 10 cities. Thus, he rules over 10 cities, and this is 1 province. Okay, so the faithful and wise servant, in this case, he is given one of the 120 provinces, thus the 10 cities. Okay, now, as we look at the millennium, we can also see the idea of these princes of Israel. Okay, so there, of course, we saw that the Persian kings represented this number as a type and shadow of Christ would do in the millennial kingdom. And we know that in Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48 is the millennial himself in the order. So it says, Ezekiel 45 verse 9, O princes of Israel, remove violence, spoil, and execute judgment and righteousness. Take away the dispositions. And then in verse 12 it says, talks about the shekel shall be 20 gerahs. Okay, so just like we're saying the shekel of the sanctuary, okay, there will be a currency in the millennium according to this order and pattern. Okay, but these are princes, and he's admonishing them even in the millennium, okay, to judge righteously. So these are the princes of Israel in the millennium, as we can also see in Ezekiel 44:24, the sons of Zadok. And it says, King James says in controversy, but it would really relate to court cases. So these will be the elders and judging the court cases, and they'll stand in judgment, and they'll keep my laws and statutes in all my assemblies, okay? So it doesn't say they'll keep the Constitution, okay, the Bill of Rights. It says they'll keep my laws and my statutes in all my assemblies, and they shall keep holy the Sabbaths, okay? So this is going back to administering the judgment and the law according to the Sabbath. And they will keep the feasts and the months, okay, the months and the Sabbaths and all the solemnities in the house of Israel. So this is the Enoch calendar. So we have to have the proper calendar to know when the feasts are, when the months are, when the Sabbaths are, okay? So they keep the calendar, all right? They're the sons of Zadok, and what you can see in Ezekiel 41 verse 6, there in the temple itself, there are side chambers. There, it says there were 3, one over another, 30 in order, okay? So there's 3 rows of 30 chambers going around the temple. And then in chapter 40, verse 17, there are 30 chambers in the court, okay? So 30 plus the 3 rows of 30 is 120. So 3 times 30 is 90 and 120. So let's show you where those are in the temple. So when it's saying that you have, chambers around the temple, so those are around the temple here, okay? And there's rows of them. So we're looking down at it. We can't depict the rows, but there's 30 going around the temple. And then it says there's another 30 going around the outer court. Okay, so you have 3 rows of 30, 90 going around the temple. And then you have 30 in these green boxes going around the outer court. Christ said, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. So the Father's house is the temple. And so once again, if we look closely at the temple, you can see built within it are chambers going around, okay, 30. Okay, and so there's 6 in a row, and then 12 and 12. So we'll see as we go the importance of the 24, okay, and the order of the house of David and the pattern of 24 and the 24 elders around the throne. So you can see 12, 12, 24 around the Holy of Holies, okay? Now, again, as we mentioned, this is the temple. In my Father's house are many mansions or rooms. So there we can see the 120, okay? As we've been explaining, there they have chambers in the millennial temple. Okay, in my Father's house are many mansions, many rooms, many realms. Okay, and these are specific to the Father's house being the temple. Now, let's continue and look at this word Senate. So when we say this word Senate, it appears once in the King James. And we'll find this on our next page of notes in the Millennial Senate, the holy elders, kings and priests, okay? So in Acts chapter 5, verse 12, they were all of one accord. So the early church, just Acts chapter 5, right after Pentecost, okay, shortly thereafter, they were in a place called Solomon's Porch, okay? So Solomon's Porch actually existed up until the time of Christ. And they assembled there. Okay, so this is part of the temple where they assembled. Now, they assembled there on purpose. Now, they were the true kings and priests. So Christ came in authority. He came as the truth. He had the 12 apostles and he had the 70 disciples, right? Well, Satan had taken over the Jews and the order given to the Jews by the Most High of the council. Okay, so then the high priest called the council. He called the council. Now, in the Greek, this is Synedrion or Sanhedrin. Okay, he said they called the council. He called the Sanhedrin and all the Senate. Now, this word in the Greek is Eurousia. Okay, I may not be pronouncing that right, but it is the chief council of nations. If you actually look it up, that's what it means. Now, it comes from 2 words. Okay, it comes from 2 words, and if we, quite often the Greek will do that, and if we break up, these 2 words and we look at the meaning, all right, we find some significant things. So it comes from the word, we have all the Strong's Concordance, so you guys can study this even more. Euron, which means old age, okay? And this is Nicodemus. He said, can a man be born when he is old? Old age, Euron, okay? And another word is ousia. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it means substance. Okay, so in Luke chapter 15, in the parable of the 2 sons, the prodigal son, he asked for all his goods, his estate, okay, his inheritance. So these are the men of old age that handle the estate, handle the government, okay, handle the inheritance of the Senate, the millennial. They're the holy ones. They're the elders, the old men. Okay, can be women as well because there were 120 in the upper room. That's what we believe, okay? So these are the Euron, and this word comes from Euros, which means old age, okay? And this word is related to the Hieros, the priest, okay? So the idea is that the Hieros is very similar to the Euros, and it's the holy, the sacred. So the word holy and sacred, this word here in old age are very closely linked, okay? So that's where the older you are, the more holy you're supposed to be. You're supposed to have more wisdom, okay? That's the idea of these elders. And of course, this goes back to Exodus 24. Okay, keep in mind the numbers 24. Moses puts together the 70 elders. So in the Hebrew, that's Zaken, and this is the aged ones, the ancient men. So in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, right here at Exodus 24, this word okay, is the old age. I forget if it's Euron or Euros. It's that word, the Greek word used in the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures as a Greek translation. So when we get to Revelation 4, verse 4, you see 24 thrones, and those that sat upon them on the seats were 24 elders. Okay, and elders is where we get the word Presbyterian. Okay, so presbyterios is a presbus, or the elderly. Okay, and it's the member of the celestial council, 24 members of the heavenly Sanhedrin. Okay, so there is a heavenly Sanhedrin that these 24 elders are showing us this order and pattern. Now, this order and pattern that we see there in Revelation chapter 4, verse 4 is not new. Okay, it goes back to the 70 elders, and it goes back to 1 Chronicles 24, where you have 24 princes of the sanctuary, princes of Elohim. All right, now, hopefully, if you've been following this series, some of these concepts should be familiar. Because of the order they're named, there's 24 names, and the 8th name is Abijah. Okay, and we also see within 1 Chronicles 24, Zadok the priest. So when we saw the millennial temple, and we saw the sons of Zadok, okay, we can see the sons of Zadok in the millennial temple in 1 Chronicles 24 with Zadok the priest. Okay, so Zadok the priest representing the priesthood, David represented Judah. They anointed and they appointed 24 leaders, and one of those was Abijah. So then we come to the New Testament, and we see Luke chapter 1, we see the priest, Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, in the course of Abijah. Okay, so he is in the same priest course of the 24 elders. Amazing. Now, he executed the priest office, says in verse 8. Now, in the Greek, the priest office there, hieretero, okay, is to perform the functions of the priest. And this word also is closely associated with the elders, the assembly. Okay? And then verse 9, according to the custom of the priest's office, hiereteria, okay, the sacred function of priesthood. So what it's showing us here is that these order of 24 elders, okay, can be expressed by lot by man. Okay, so these are angels in Revelation 4, verse 4. These are 24 angels, and oh my goodness, I'm doing the video, and there's another rainbow, guys. Look at that. I'm doing the video, and there's another rainbow. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I just looked up. I saw the sunlight coming out. I just looked up and I saw that rainbow. That is amazing. So let's keep going. And continue our message. He's showing his glory. Isn't that awesome? Hallelujah. Okay, so let's continue on the princes of the sanctuary, okay? And now we also see this word, okay, stay focused, guys, on this word of the priesthood in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5. So I'm showing you all these New Testament scriptures so you can see that the words in Greek, it's amazing. It's you are living stones built up into a spiritual house. So remember how we showed you the temple. You know, you're built up into a spiritual house. Okay, you're built up into a spiritual house. In my Father's house, there are many mansions, right? In the temple, in the millennium, it's talking about the millennial temple. Okay, you are the living stones. You're the pieces to the building. And you are a holy priesthood. Okay, so here we have a very similar word that we saw in Luke chapter 1. Okay, you're a body, a priestly body, a fraternity, a sacred order. Okay, and this is used in the Septuagint in Exodus, where it's talking about the peculiar people. Okay, verse 9, but you are a chosen, eklektos, generation. Okay, yenos, which is a kindred, a royal or kingly priesthood. okay, here at Tumah, okay, a holy nation, a peculiar people. So it's quite clear that the referencing here in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 is the 24 elders, okay, because the same word that we saw, okay, you can see the same word is used here in Luke chapter 1 with the priesthood, the course of Abijah, right? So you can see that similar words are used in the Greek, and this word relates to the 24 elders. So there's not a new priesthood. It's the same order of the priesthood, going back to Moses, going back to David, of the 24 elders. All right? Now, this, of course, would go into the millennium when they will be kings and priests. Now, of course, back then it was separated. You had Aaron, you had Judah, you had Levi, you had Judah, and you had king, governmental, and you had priest, separate. But they come into one through Christ. He comes in the order of Melchizedek, okay? So Melchizedek comes in the order of both king and priest, okay? So the whole order here is king and priest. In 2 Peter, let's go to 2 Peter. I know there's confusion about the millennium, but let's look at it. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 8. One day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day, okay? Now, what this is talking about, it's talking about the day of the Lord. Now, the day of the Lord is the Sabbath, okay? So the day God created the heavens and the earth, and then he rested on the seventh day. Well, the seventh day is 7,000 years, and that's the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is the Sabbath, okay? So the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, looking for and hastening unto the coming of Parousia, or revealing, okay, of the day of the Lord, okay, when there'll be a new heavens and new earth, okay? So new heavens and new earth is both the millennium and New Jerusalem, okay? We're entering that time, but it's 1,000 years, okay? 1,000 years is the day of the Lord is the Sabbath, okay? And the rainbow is still there. And then, of course, when, God made his covenant with Noah, there was a rainbow. Right outside, there's a rainbow. Okay, so that covenant never changed, okay? And this is, the day of the Lord, okay? New heavens, new earth. And then it says here, beloved, seeing that you look for such things, be diligent that you may be found of him in peace, okay, and without spot and blameless unto the entering of these 1,000 years. Isn't that amazing? Look at that rainbow. And it's a reminder, guys, of the day of the Lord. How many colors? Roy G. Biv. Okay. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Okay, the seventh color being the seventh day, the millennium. Okay, is it still there? Yes, amazing. So guys, thanks for watching. We're going to have a playlist called The Millennium. We'll also have a series of videos on the kings of Persia. Okay, so we're looking at the kings of Persia in light of the millennial reign of Christ. So we can see in this video the 120 satraps. Now, if you're interested in more of this on the 120, we have many videos. It's part of another playlist called The Man-Child. Okay, I know many people are offended by this concept, but it's real. Okay, it's a real concept. It's all of the things that we're saying in this video will come to pass. They will come into fruition during the millennial reign of Christ, where he will rule over 120 provinces, and he will have 120 princes of those provinces. So guys, thanks for watching. And as we say, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Worship him that made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and the fountains of waters. Amen.